The fire marshal's notice nailed to the orphanage gate said the brush had to go, or the building would. Lily Mercer stood at the bus stop with $20, one cardboard suitcase, and 47 goats too thin to sell, their ribs like washboards under dust-colored hair. Everyone laughed. 3 weeks later, the whole county would drive out to watch what those goats had found. The morning Lily turned 18, Miss Adelaide walked her to the porch and pressed a folded 20 into her palm. "Nobody's going to hand you a good start," the old woman said, squinting at the gravel road. "So you learn to see worth where other folks only see weeds. That's the whole trick of staying alive out here." Lily nodded the way you nod at things you don't understand yet. She tucked the bill away and watched the dust settle over everything she was, leaving. The Sunrise Children's Home sat at the edge of Caddo County, a two-story house with peeling white paint and a hill behind it gone wild with juniper and scrub oak. Lily had lived there 11 years, since the winter her parents' car slid off the county road. She knew every creaking stair, every leak in the roof, every face that came and went. The little ones called her the one who stayed. She was good with growing things. The vegetable garden out back was hers. Tomatoes staked straight, beans climbing string, a row of melons she babied through every dry July. Miss Adelaide always said Lily could coax a crop out of a parking lot. But a garden wasn't a future, and the state of Oklahoma had rules. At 18, you aged out, you left. The trouble was money. The orphanage ran on donations and a thin county check, and the hill behind the house had become a problem nobody could afford to fix. Years of unchecked brush had turned it into a fire hazard, and after a dry spring, the fire marshal had posted a notice: clear the overgrowth within 60 days or face condemnation. A clearing crew wanted $4,000. The home didn't have 400. Lily heard the adults talking in low voices through the kitchen wall. She heard the word close. She heard the children would be relocated. She lay awake doing the arithmetic of a place she loved running out of time. In town, the man who held most things was Dale Pritchard, who owned the feed store, the lot beside the bank, and a temper he wore like a good coat. He'd offered to buy the orphanage land for a fraction of its worth, planning to flip it once the building came down. He'd been patient about it, the way a man is patient when he expects gravity to do his work for him. The day before she left, Lily stood at the back fence, looking up at the hill. The brush ran thick and silver-green to the crest, hiding the slope completely. Nobody had walked up there in years. Somewhere under all that tangle was the ground itself, and Lily, who had read every farming book the county library owned, knew that ground was just sleeping, not dead. She had a garden's worth of knowledge and $20, and no place to put either one. She had until sundown tomorrow to become a person who lived somewhere. The bus to the city left at noon. She had not bought a ticket. She was waiting at the bus stop when the livestock truck rattled by and stalled out across the road. The driver, a sun-creased man named Hollis Boone, climbed down cursing his radiator. In the back, packed too tight, stood a crowd of goats, gaunt, knock-kneed, coats dull, the kind of animals an auction house turns away. "Where those headed?" Lily asked, because waiting made her restless. "Nowhere good," Hollis said. "Bought a lot cheap, can't move 'em. Too skinny for meat, too plain for show. 47 head of nothing," he spat. "Be lucky to get $1 a hoof." Lily looked at the goats. The goats looked at the hill across the way, the silver-green tangle climbing toward the orphanage, and something in her chest turned over hard. "I've got $20, she heard herself say. Hollis laughed. Then he saw she wasn't joking, and stopped. $20, Hollis repeated, like she'd offered him buttons. "Girl, there's 47 of them. You know what 47 goats eat?" "Brush," Lily said. "Juniper, scrub oak, poison ivy, greenbrier. Things nothing else will touch." She was already moving, crossing the road, her cardboard suitcase forgotten on the bench. Goats are browsers, not grazers. They'd rather strip a thorn bush than eat grass. Most people get that backwards. Hollis scratched his neck. He'd been trying to unload these animals for 2 weeks. Every buyer wanted fat or fancy, and these were neither. But a girl with a single bill and no truck and no land that he could see was not a buyer. She was a problem waiting to happen. You got somewhere to keep 'em? She pointed across the road, up the slope behind the White House. That hill. 40 acres of exactly what they eat, and the people who own it need it cleared by law inside 2 months. A crew wants $4,000 to do it. She turned back to him. I can do it for free. The goats do it for free. They get fed, the hill gets cleared, and the home doesn't get condemned. It was the longest speech Hollis had heard from anybody under 30 in some time. He looked at the hill. He looked at the goats, who were chewing the truck's wooden slats with the focused patience of animals who would chew anything. Even if that's true, he said slowly, skinny goats die. They get worms, they get foot rot, they get out and wander into the road. You'd be signing up to nurse 47 sick animals with no money and no fence and no place to sleep yourself. You thought about that? She had not, fully. The truth of it landed on her all at once. She had no shelter, no feed for the lean first weeks before the brush built them up, no fence to hold them, no vet money, nowhere to lay her own head once the orphanage door shut behind her at sundown. $20 was the whole of it. The bus ticket to the city was the safe thing, the sane thing. A room somewhere, a job at a diner, a normal small life that didn't depend on 47 gambles with hooves. She thought about Miss Adelaide's voice. You learn to see worth where other folks only see weeds. She thought about the little ones calling her the one who stayed. I've thought about it. She lied, and then made it true by deciding, $20 and I haul them off your hands right now today. You were going to take a loss anyway. Take a smaller one and be done. Hollis was quiet a long moment. Hell, Hollis said finally, and it came out almost gentle. I haven't got the heart to watch you starve, but I haven't got the heart to drive these poor things to the renderer either. He pulled off his cap, wiped his forehead, put it back. Tell you what, keep your 20. You'll need it worse than me. Goats are yours, and I'll run 'em up that hill in my truck, since you sure can't carry 'em. Lily's hand was still holding the folded bill out between them. Why? Because you're the first person in 2 weeks who looked at these animals and saw something other than a loss. He climbed back in the cab. Open that gate, girl. Let's go find out if you're right or just stubborn. The gate Lily ran to open belonged to Miss Adelaide, who came out onto the porch in her apron and watched a livestock truck back up to the brush line, like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. She did not ask many questions. She had spent 40 years learning which children needed and which only needed a door held open. You're not getting on that bus, she said. It wasn't a question. No, ma'am. The old woman looked up at the wild hill, then down at the thin and hopeful girl she'd raised. Then you'll need coffee, she said, and you'll sleep in the mudroom till we sort this out. The goats did not look like salvation when Hollis tipped the truck gate and they spilled out onto the orphanage back acre. They looked like a rummage sale of livestock, every color of brown and gray, ears every which way, a few with horns and a few without, all of them gaunt and blinking in the May light. They stood in a confused huddle for about 4 seconds. Then the lead doe, a rangy gray animal Lily would later name Captain, lifted her nose, smelled 40 acres of juniper, and walked straight into the brush like she owned the deed. The rest followed. Within an hour, the sound coming off the hill was the steady crunch and rip of 47 mouths working through growth that had stood untouched for a decade. Lily had no fence. She had read enough to know goats would wander, so she did the only thing $20 and a strong back allowed. She herded. She walked the perimeter all that first day, turning back strays, learning which animals led and which followed, which were bold and which were skittish. By evening her legs shook and her boots had worn through at one heel, but the goats were fat-bellied and drowsy, and exactly where she wanted them, and a swath of the lower hill that had been impenetrable that morning was chewed down to bare, breathing earth. Miss Adelaide fed her cornbread and beans on the back step. The little ones pressed their faces to the screen door and counted goats until they lost track and started over. The first weeks were a war of small problems. Lily built fence the way poor people build everything, out of whatever was lying around. She salvaged wire from a collapsed shed, cut posts from the very scrub oak the goats were clearing, and traded a week of garden vegetables to a neighbor for a roll of old field fencing. She didn't enclose the whole hill. She made a moving pen, a rough paddock she could take down and rebuild higher up the slope every few days, so the goats ate one section bare, then advanced. Rotational browsing, the library books called it. Lily just called it moving the goats. She lost 2 animals the first week, both to a worm load they'd carried in already too far gone. She cried over the second one behind the shed where the children couldn't see, then dried her face and read everything the library had on parasites. She learned to mix a dewormer she could afford, to check the pink inside their lower eyelids for the telltale paleness of anemia, to rotate them off ground they'd already fouled. She lost no more after that. What she gained day by day was animals that no longer looked like a loss. The brush was the best feed they'd ever had, high and varied and free, and they bloomed on it. Coats that had been dull went sleek, ribs disappeared under flesh. The skittish ones grew bold. The bold ones grew downright friendly. Captain took to following Lily like a dog and would butt her hip for scratching. The kids born that first spring, 9 of them, wobbly and bright-eyed, turned the whole enterprise from a gamble into something that looked, if you squinted, like a herd. Word got around town the way it does. A girl from the orphanage had spent her last money on a truckload of junk goats and was living in a mudroom, letting them eat a hillside. At the feed store, Dale Pritchard found it very funny. Weed eaters, he called them, to anybody who'd listen. She's got 47 weed eaters and a head full of weeds to match. He laughed, and the men around the counter laughed, because Dale signed a lot of their credit. What Dale did not say out loud was that the orphanage clearing the hill themselves, for free, was an inconvenience. He'd been counting on that fire marshal notice. He'd been counting on condemnation, on a forced sale, on getting 40 acres at the price of dirt. A girl and a herd of goats were not in his arithmetic. Lily heard the weed eater talk and let it slide off her. She had stopped having time for what the town thought. Her days ran sunup to sundown. Move the pen, walk the lines, check eyelids and hooves, doctor what needed doctoring. Haul water up the slope in 2 5-gallon buckets that left grooves in her palms. At night she fell asleep over library books with a pencil behind her ear, and the hill kept changing. Every section the goats cleared revealed ground no one had seen in years. Old terraces, a tumbled stone wall, the rusted blade of a plow. The hill, it turned out, had not always been wild. Somebody a long time ago had worked it. Lily started to wonder who and why they'd stopped. The answer came up out of the brush a piece at a time, the way the stone wall had. By midsummer, the goats had stripped the lower third of the hill and were working the middle slope, and Lily walked the cleared ground every evening like a woman reading a book in a language she was only just learning. The terraces she'd found weren't natural. They were cut, long, level shelves carved into the hillside and held with dry stacked stone, the kind of work that takes years and a reason. On the third terrace, she found the first tree. It didn't look like much. The brush had grown up through it and around it and nearly swallowed it, and it stood gnarled and half-strangled, its trunk wrapped in greenbrier the goats hadn't reached yet. But the leaves were wrong for scrub. They were broad and toothed, and when Lily pulled the vines away and looked up into the tangle, she saw, small and green and hard, a clutch of unripe fruit, apples, a wild, neglected apple tree, choking under 50 years of brush. She stood very still. Then she started clearing by hand, faster than the goats, tearing at greenbrier until her arms bled, and the more she cleared, the more she found. Not one tree, a row, then another row on the terrace above. Then, as the goats ate their way upward in the following weeks, and she followed behind freeing trunks from vine, an entire orchard revealed itself across the upper slopes. apple and pear, and a stand of plums down in the swale, and along the crest a long line of something with darker bark that she didn't recognize until the library did. Hardy old peach trees, the tough kind grown from seed a century back. Somebody had planted a hillside orchard. Decades ago, before the orphanage, before the wild took it. Somebody had terraced this slope and set out scores of fruit trees, and then, for reasons buried with them, had walked away. The brush had moved in. The trees had survived because fruit trees are stubborn, because they don't need a person to keep living, only to keep being useful. They had gone on flowering and fruiting in the dark of the brush for 50 years, dropping their crop into the tangle where nobody could see, feeding nothing but birds. Lily took a sample branch to the county extension office in town. The agent there, a patient woman named Ruth Okafor, turned the twig in her hands and got a strange look. "Where'd you get this?" "The hill behind the orphanage. There's a lot of them. A whole orchard." Ruth set the branch down carefully. "Honey, this is an old variety, the kind of apple nobody grows anymore because it doesn't ship well and doesn't store. So the big operations dropped it 40 years ago. But it's got a flavor people pay through the nose for now. There's a name for trees like this." She smiled. "Heritage, heirloom. The orchards that still have these old varieties charge double, triple at the farmers' markets. City restaurants drive out to buy them." She tapped the branch. "And you're telling me you've got a whole hillside nobody's touched in 50 years?" Lily walked home with her head full of arithmetic again, but a different kind. She counted trees over the next week. The goats had cleared enough now to see them properly. 143 fruit trees, alive and bearing, freed from the brush that had hidden them. Apples that would ripen in fall, pears behind them, plums already coming on. And the goats, who'd done all the clearing nobody else would pay for, had handed her an orchard worth more than the whole farm. The hill stopped being a fire hazard the town laughed about. It became, almost overnight, the most valuable 40 acres in the county, though only Lily and Ruth and Miss Adelaide knew it yet. She told Miss Adelaide that night on the back step. The old woman listened the way she did, without interrupting, and when Lily finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Worth where other folks saw weeds," she said softly. "You knew? I knew there used to be an orchard, long before my time here. I figured it died out." She shook her head slowly. "I never once thought to send something up there to clear it. 40 years I looked at that hill and saw a problem." She reached over and squeezed Lily's worn hand. "You looked at it and saw supper." Lily lay in the mudroom that night, too excited to sleep. The fire marshal notice was as good as answered. The hill would be clear by August. The orphanage was saved from condemnation. And if she could harvest and sell even half of what those trees would drop, there'd be money, real money, enough to keep the home open on its own legs. For about a week, everything was perfect. Then Dale Pritchard drove out to see what all the talk was about. He came up the drive in his big clean truck and got out slow, the way a man does when he wants you to watch him take his time. He looked at the cleared hill. He looked at the rows of freed fruit trees marching up the terraces, heavy with green crop. Lily saw the exact moment he understood what he was seeing, because the smile slid right off his face and something harder came up underneath. "Well," Dale said, "isn't that something?" He turned a slow circle, taking in all 40 acres. "All this time I figured this hill was worthless." He looked at Lily, and now the smile came back, but wrong. "Turns out it's the best land in the county. And you don't own a square foot of it, do you?" He was right, and that was the trouble. Lily didn't own the hill, the orphanage didn't exactly, either, not free and clear. Over the next days, with Ruth's help, she learned the shape of the danger, and it was worse than she'd feared. The Sunrise Children's Home stood on land that had been deeded to it decades back by the county, with a lien still attached, a debt the home had carried for years, paying it down a few dollars at a time. The note was held by the bank, and Dale Pritchard, it turned out, sat on the bank's board and had recently bought up a stack of the bank's older, troubled loans at a discount. the orphanage's lien among them. He hadn't cared about it when the land was worthless. He cared now. A man came out from the bank with a clipboard and a surveyor. Notices appeared. The lien, it developed, was technically in default. The home had missed 2 small payments during the lean winter, when every dollar went to the furnace, and the terms allowed the note holder to call the entire balance due if it wasn't cured within 90 days. The balance was just over $11,000. Dale, as the note holder, had called it. "He's foreclosing," Ruth said grimly, spreading the papers on Miss Adelaide's kitchen table. "Or he will, if you can't pay the whole 11,000 by the deadline. And if he forecloses, he takes the land. Hill, orchard, building, all of it." Miss Adelaide had gone pale. $11,000 was a fortune. The home took in barely enough to keep the lights on. There was no 11,000 and no way to raise it before fall. "The fruit," Lily said. "The orchard. When the apples come in. Won't be in time," Ruth said gently. "Apples ripen in September, October. The harvest could bring real money, yes. But the deadline he set falls in August. He timed it on purpose, Lily. He knows the trees are loaded. He knows exactly what they're worth. That's why he wants the land now before you can prove it can pay for itself." She tapped the papers. "He calls the note. You can't pay. He takes the farm and the orchard with it. Then he sells the fruit. Every cent of it." Lily felt the old cold arithmetic close over her. She had cleared the hill. She had freed the orchard. She had turned worthless land into something precious. And in doing so, she had handed Dale Pritchard a reason to take everything. He came back twice that month, friendly as poison. He offered generously, he said, to buy the home out, to pay the lien, and a little besides, take the land off their hands, relocate the children somewhere more suitable. He stood in the kitchen. Miss Adelaide had run for 40 years and talked about it like he was doing them a kindness. He mentioned in passing that fighting him would only run up legal bills the home couldn't pay, and drag the children through a court fight, and that surely Miss Adelaide didn't want that at her age. "You ought to think of the little ones," he said, hat in his hands, eyes flat. "A clean sail's the merciful thing." After he left, the kitchen was very quiet. One of the smaller children, a boy of 6 who understood more than the adults wished he did, asked if they were going to have to move. Nobody could answer him. Lily walked up the hill alone that evening and stood among the trees she'd freed. The apples hung green and hard and weeks from ripe, weeks past the deadline. The goats moved around her in the dusk, fat and content, browsing the last of the brush, having no idea they'd uncovered a treasure that was about to be stolen out from under the people who needed it. She had done everything right. She had seen worth where others saw weeds, and it had only made the wolf hungrier. The town, which had laughed at her goats, now murmured a different tune. Half of them said she'd worked a miracle. Half of them said it was a shame she'd worked it on land she was about to lose. And stoots of them, when it came down to it, owed Dale Pritchard money and would not cross him. Lily did not sleep much that week. She read, not farming books now, but the slim county library shelf on law, on liens and deeds and foreclosure, words she had to look up one at a time. She drove with Ruth to the county seat and sat in the recorder's office, going through dusty plat books, looking for anything, any handhold. It was in the plat books that she found the first thread. The deed that conveyed the orphanage land from the county decades back was strange. It wasn't a simple sale. It was a gift, a charitable conveyance, made by the same family that had once planted the orchard, deeding the hill and the house to the county on the explicit condition that the land be used to shelter children. Lily read the old clerk's cramped handwriting 3 times. There was a clause. A reversionary clause, Ruth called it when Lily showed her finger trembling on the line. "This says," Ruth read slowly, "that the land was given for the care of orphaned and dependent children, and that if it ever ceases to be used for that purpose, the title doesn't go to whoever holds the debt. It reverts. It goes back to the donor's heirs, or, if none can be found, to a county charitable trust to be used for the same purpose." She looked up. "Lily, This changes things. It changed things, but Lily didn't yet see how, and the days were running out. She kept digging. With Ruth's help, she tracked the donor family's name through the plat books and the old newspaper archive on microfilm at the library. A family named Halloran, who'd homesteaded the hill, planted the orchard, and lost their own children to the influenza in 1919, after which the grieving parents had deeded the whole place to the county so that other people's children might have it. The orchard had been planted by a mother and father for children who never grew up to harvest it. Lily sat in the dark library with the microfilm glowing and felt something steady in her settle into place. The trees had been waiting 50 years. They'd been planted out of love and grief for children, and now they'd fed a herd of unwanted goats and revealed themselves at exactly the moment a houseful of children needed saving. It wasn't luck. It felt to Lily almost like a promise being kept. She found the rest of what she needed across 2 more days. The Halloran line had no living heirs anyone could trace. The family had ended with that. Influenza winter, which meant, under the reversionary clause, that if the home ever stopped sheltering children, the land would pass not to Dale Pritchard or his bank, but to a county charitable trust dedicated to children's welfare. Foreclosure couldn't extinguish that clause. It ran with the land, recorded right there in the deed, ahead of every loan and lien Dale had bought up. But the clause was a shield, not a sword. It meant Dale couldn't simply seize the orchard and flip it for profit. The land could only ever be used for children. That gutted his whole plan. Worthless to him was land he couldn't sell or develop. It did not by itself pay the $11,000. The home could still be foreclosed on for the debt. The clause only meant Dale would foreclose on something he could never cash in. Lily needed two things. She needed to make Dale understand publicly that the prize he was reaching for would turn to ash in his hands, and she needed $11,000 she did not have before August. She had the orchard. She had 143 loaded fruit trees and a town that drove out on Sundays now just to look at the cleared hill, and a county extension agent with a thick book of contacts, and a herd of goats that had become somehow locally famous. She had Miss Adelaide's name, good in this county for 40 years. She had a story people wanted to be part of. She did not have money, but she was starting to understand that money was only one kind of worth, and that she'd spent a whole summer learning to find the other kinds. She sat down at Miss Adelaide's kitchen table with a pencil and a clean sheet of paper, and she started to make a plan. Then the letter came, and it was worse than she'd braced for. Dale, perhaps sensing the ground shifting, had moved up his timeline. The bank's lawyer had filed. The foreclosure sale was set for the second week of August, barely 3 weeks off, and weeks before a single apple would be ripe enough to sell. Worse, the notice named a hearing where the home would have to show cause, in front of a judge, why the sale shouldn't proceed. Miss Adelaide read the letter twice and set it down with a hand that shook. 3 weeks, she said quietly. We can't raise it in 3 weeks. There's no harvest in 3 weeks. She looked very old suddenly and very tired. I think we may have lost it, child. Lily climbed the hill that night and didn't come down for a long time. She sat on the third terrace, her back against the oldest apple tree, the one she'd freed first with her bleeding arms in June. The goats had bedded down nearby, pale shapes in the dark, Captain close enough to lean against. Below her, the orphanage windows glowed yellow, one by one going dark as the little ones were put to bed. The boy of 6 who'd asked if they'd have to move, all of them sleeping in a house that might not be theirs by the end of summer. She had done everything right, and it hadn't been enough. She'd seen the worth nobody else saw, just like Miss Adelaide told her to. And a man with money and a board seat was going to take it anyway. Because that was how it went, wasn't it? For orphans, and old women, and skinny goats, and everybody else the world had already written off. She put her face against Captain's warm flank and let herself feel for a little while how tired she was. But the tree at her back was a tree that had been left for dead and kept living. The goats around her were animals that had been bound for the renderer and were now sleek and fat and ready to bear. The terrace under her had been built by people grieving children, for children, and it had waited 50 years to matter. Nothing up here had given up. She thought maybe she couldn't either. She understood it all at once, sitting in the dark. She'd been thinking like Dale, that the only worth was the kind you cashed at a bank. But the hill had taught her better. The orchard's value wasn't only in fruit sold in September, it was in what it was. A thing the whole county now wanted to see. A story? A future that paid for itself if people could only be shown. She didn't need $11,000 in cash by August. She needed the county to see what she'd seen. She needed to turn a hidden orchard into a public promise. Loud enough that Dale Pritchard couldn't quietly take it. She came down the hill at dawn with a plan. Lily's plan had 3 parts, and she started on all of them that same morning. The first was the law. She and Ruth took the deed, the plat books, and the microfilm copies to a legal aid attorney 2 counties over, a young lawyer named Marcus Webb who did pro bono work for charities and who got very interested very fast when he read the reversionary clause. "This is ironclad," he said, reading it a second time. "Whoever drew this up knew exactly what they were doing. The land is locked to children's use forever. A foreclosure transfers the debt's claim, but it can't strip a covenant that runs with the land and predates every lien on it." He looked up. "Mr. Pritchard can foreclose, but the second the home stops sheltering children, the title reverts to the county children's trust. He'd be buying a hillside he can't sell, can't develop, can't do one thing with except run an orphanage on it, which I'm guessing he has no interest in doing." "None," Lily said. "Then let's make sure he knows it. In writing, before the hearing." Marcus started drafting that afternoon. The second part was the harvest, or the proof of it. Lily couldn't make apples ripen early, but she could show the county what was coming. With Ruth's help, she invited the Agricultural Extension, the local paper, and 3 farmers' market organizers out to the hill for what she called, simply, an open day. She didn't have to oversell it. People came because they'd been wondering all summer. They walked the cleared terraces. They saw 143 heritage fruit trees, heavy with green crop, in rows older than anyone living. Ruth explained to anybody who'd listen what heritage apples fetched at market and what restaurants paid for old plum varieties. The newspaper photographer took a picture of Lily standing among the trees with Captain the Goat at her hip, and it ran on the front page of the County Weekly under a headline, "Somebody Couldn't Resist. The Girl Who Saw Supper." That picture did more than any lawyer could, because the third part of Lily's plan was the one that needed the whole county, and the picture put the whole county on her side. She'd realized, sitting on the hill in the dark, that she didn't need to find $11,000. She needed to let the orchard be worth $11,000 to enough people, so she sold the future. With Marcus drawing up clean little contracts, she offered shares in the coming harvest, a subscription paid now for a bushel of heritage apples or pears or plums delivered in the fall, plus a standing share of the orchard's yield for years to come. A community-supported orchard, Ruth called it. Lily called it letting folks buy a piece of the hill before the hill could be taken. She set up a card table at the farmer's market with a hand-lettered sign and the front page photo taped to the front. She expected a trickle. She got a line. The county had laughed at the goats in May. By August, it had fallen a little in love with the whole improbable story. And people will pay to be part of a story that's about to come true. Restaurant owners bought multiple shares. The market organizers bought in. Families who'd driven out on Sundays just to look bought a bushel of fall apples and shook her hand. Even old farmers who'd known the Halloran orchard was up there once in their grandparents' time came and paid and told her things she wrote down. By the second week of August, the subscriptions, the pre-sales, and a matching donation from a regional Heritage Orchard Society Ruth had written to had raised $11,400. Lily counted it twice at Miss Adelaide's kitchen table, and then a third time and then she sat back and put her hands flat on the money like it might float away. The hearing was on a Thursday. The little courtroom in the county seat was fuller than anyone could remember for a foreclosure. Half the farmers' market seemed to have come. Dale Pritchard arrived in his good coat, expecting a formality. He did not get one. Marcus stood and laid it out plain for the judge. First, the home was prepared to cure the entire debt. $11,000 and the missed payments, in full, that very morning, certified and ready. That alone ended the foreclosure. A debt paid is a debt that can't be sold out from under anyone. But Marcus didn't stop there. He read the reversionary clause into the record, handed up the certified deed, and explained, for the benefit of the court and the very attentive newspaper reporter in the second row, exactly what the land could and could not ever be used for. Children. Only children forever. Whatever Mr. Pritchard had imagined doing with that hillside, the deed had foreclosed him, 50 years before he was ever on the bank's board. Dale's lawyer leaned over and whispered to him for a while. Dale's face did the thing Lily had watched it do up on the hill, the smile sliding off, the hard thing coming up, and then, this time, something past the hard thing, something that knew when it was beaten. There was no profit here. There never could have been. He'd been chasing land that could only ever be an orphanage, and now the orphanage could pay its own debt and had a courtroom full of witnesses and a front-page photograph and a lawyer who knew the deed cold. He withdrew the foreclosure before the judge had to rule. He did it stiffly, and he did not look at Lily, and he left quickly. He was not destroyed. He still had his store and his lot and his board seat. He had simply, finally, run into a kind of worth he couldn't buy or take, and he knew it. Outside on the courthouse steps, the County Weekly's reporter asked Lily how it felt. She thought about it. Like the trees finally got to do what they were planted for, she said. That fall, the harvest came in heavier than even Ruth had guessed. The subscribers got their bushels. The restaurants got their heritage apples. The orphanage paid off the lien free and clear, fixed the furnace, and put a new roof on the old white house. And the hill that the whole town had once called worthless became every September after the place the county drove out to pick fruit from trees a grieving family had planted 100 years before, for children they would never meet. The next spring, Miss Adelaide walked out onto the porch and found Lily already up the hill, moving the goats to fresh ground, Captain trailing her like a shadow. The orchard above them was a cloud of pink and white, every one of the 143 trees in bloom, and below the blossoms the brush was gone for good, the terraces clean, the stone walls standing clear in the morning light. A new child stood at the fence watching, a girl of 9, just arrived, suitcase still by the gate. "Go on up," Miss Adelaide told her. "She'll teach you how to look at things." The girl climbed toward the blossoms and the goats, and the young woman who had once stepped off a bus into the rest of her life.